Hi, we haven't done a taking it further video for quite a while, so following on from Sunday, I thought I would do one just to talk to you a little bit about the Greek version of the Old Testament and how we can use that to help us go deeper in our study of the Bible. Episode 7 of these Taking It Further videos, if you've not had a look at that one about doing a word study, that gives you a brief introduction to how you can use Bible Gateway and how you can use the Step Bible, both free online resources that allow you to quite quickly and quite easily do searches across the whole of the Bible on certain words, whether they be in English, from an English translation of the Bible, or from in Hebrew for the Old Testament, or Greek for the New Testament. But I want to talk to you briefly today about something called the Septuagint. If you look on Wikipedia, you will see that the Septuagint is the first Greek translation of the Old Testament. The Old Testament was predominantly written in Hebrew. The New Testament was predominantly written in Greek. But by around about 400 years before Jesus, there was already an increasing number of people who could read Greek, but who couldn't read Hebrew. And so it was felt that it would be helpful to have a Greek translation of the Old Testament. And so the Septuagint, so you can look up all the details on Wikipedia, but we're kind of talking about something that was completed around about 300 years before Jesus. It gets its name from Latin to do with the fact that it was put together by 70 translators, and that's where the word Septuagint comes from. Sometimes you will see it in shorthand as LXX, which is the Roman numerals for 70. So we're going to use the Step Bible, and so I'm just going to go and get that up online now. So I'm going to go to the stepbible.org. You'll see that's the address. It's a great free resource. And as I've shown you before, if you have a quick look at episode 7, up here, these 3 little dots, you will have access to some video demonstrations and some guide instructions, which will give you a helpful overview. So the Old Testament is in Hebrew. The New Testament is in Greek. Your Bible is probably in English. So what I am going to do to start off with is I am going to open up the English Standard Version, the ESV, which you'll see on the right-hand side. These little codes show you how many resources are linked to these various translations. And in terms of an English translation, the ESV has got the most tools available. So that's why we've got that one open. I've already got so if we go up to here, ancient, I want the Greek New Testament. So I'm going to use this one, the SBLG, again, because it's got the most resources. I'm going to use the Greek Old Testament. So that's the LXX, the Septuagint that I've talked to you about. And again, that's got a lot of resources. And I want the Hebrew Old Testament, and looking down the one with the most resources, I'm going to go for this one, the THOT. And once I've got all those clicked, I'm going to click on OK. So what I have now got is I have got the English Standard Version. So this is open at Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. The SBLG is the New Testament in Greek, so there's nothing there. The LXX is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. So you've got that. And then here you've got the Hebrew. Now, I can read a little bit of Greek. I can't read any Hebrew. So, but that doesn't exclude us from using this resource, as you will see, because when you click on a particular word in the English, it flags up where that word is in the Hebrew. And if you point to a particular word, you will see at the bottom, it goes away, but you'll see at the bottom of the screen, it gives you the English translation of that word. It gives you the Hebrew in Hebrew script, but it also gives you the Hebrew in English script, Shamayim. Right, so on Sunday, the reason I wanted to show you this is because on Sunday we looked at, as part of what we were doing, the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, and we looked at this verse, Matthew 5, chapter 7, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. And we were looking at this in the light of the lame man who was healed by the pool. So, and now you'll see that I've got the Greek up here, but I don't have the Old Testament Greek because Matthew's in the New Testament, and I don't have the Hebrew because the New Testament was written in Greek. So, blessed are the merciful. And if I point to the word merciful, you will see that that's flagging up this Greek word, which I can see from the top of the screen is pronounced elimon. And then there's if I click on it, you'll see over here, I get some more information about that word, the Greek word. I get its meaning. I get some extra information, similar words, how it's translated in the New Testament. But what I'm interested in at this point is this word occurs about 18 times in the Old Testament, 2 times in the New Testament. If I click on this, I will get a list down the screen of all of those verses where this Greek word elimon appears. So because I've got the LXX, the Greek Old Testament open, it will pull up the times that particular Greek word is used in the Old Testament translation, the Greek Old Testament, and also in the New Testament. The writers of the New Testament, although they were writing in Greek, many of them will have had a very firm Hebrew Old Testament background. And so you've got they might be writing in Greek, but they're thinking in Hebrew. And quite often, like you will have heard me talk about hyperlinks before, hyperlinks between the New Testament and the Old Testament. And so sometimes it's helpful to be able to go from our English in the New Testament to the Greek in the New Testament to the Greek in the Old Testament to pick up a Hebrew word. And so that we can then do a search in the Old Testament on a Hebrew word, which is kind of behind the thoughts of what one of the New Testament writers is using when they're using a particular Greek word. Hopefully, I'm not going to tie us all in knots, but we will wait and see. So let's have a look at Exodus 34, verse 6. So it's got this word elimon here. And if I go along the English line, you will see that it flags up where particular words are. And so I can, although I can't maybe we can't read Greek, we can't read Hebrew, we can see where those words are. And also as I go along here, I get at the top of the screen or the bottom of the screen, depending on the setup, where what that translation is. So this word elimon here in Exodus 34 verse 6, I can see from the top of the screen is translated as merciful. So it's this a God merciful and gracious. If you're familiar with the Old Testament, if you're familiar with the NIV, you might have learned this as a God compassionate and gracious. So the NIV translates this word here compassionate. The ESV translates it as merciful. Now, so which, and you'll see it's flagging up this word here. So we've gone from the elimon in the Greek to merciful in the English, which flags up that we are talking about this word, which you can see from the top of my screen. Rachum is often, if I just click on this, it will go over to the right hand side. Quite often it's translated compassionate. It's always of God, with one possible exception in the 13 times it occurs. And so where the new Matthew's use this word elimon in Greek, where that's come from, one of the roots that one of the things he'd have had in his mind is this this Hebrew word rachum. And if I was to click on these 13 times over here, I will get a list of all 13 times in the Old Testament where this Hebrew word occurs. And if I was to look through all of them, that might help me to have a deeper understanding of the English word in Matthew chapter 5, merciful. And I could, at 13, it's an easily doable number. It wouldn't take me very long to have a look at all these in detail. Just as an example, one of the things it flags up, which I thought was interesting when I looked at this first time, it flags up from this verse from Jonah chapter 4. Part of the reason that Jonah didn't want to go and preach to the Ninevites because he knew that God was a merciful God. And what does that mean in the context of the story of Jonah? Well, it means that God is a merciful God, the sort of God who will forgive even his enemies, even some of the worst people that have done some of the worst atrocities across their empire to their enemies. They've done some horrible things. And yet Jonah knows that God is a merciful God. He's the sort of God that if these people repent and turn to him, rather than punish them, he will forgive them. And so by going from the English to the Greek to the Hebrew and looking through some of the Old Testament, we may well pick up some verses which help us to have a deeper understanding of what we're reading in the New Testament, which we might not pick up otherwise. Hopefully that hasn't tied you in knots. Hopefully it's made some sense. I quite often have these 4 books open, and so when I'm in the English New Testament, I've got the Greek New Testament open, but also the LXX, the Septuagint, the Old Testament in Greek, which is a link to the Old Testament in Hebrew, which then allows us to pick up Hebrew words and Hebrew themes that just help us understand more of the New Testament. So hopefully that was helpful.